Hello, my name is Ted Nisker, and this is my very first training video. Before we begin, I would like to thank Twist for filming, editing, and creating all the music that went into this. Twist is definitely an amazing artist and producer, and if you'd like to see some of his work, please check out Think Free Productions on YouTube. The painting I'm teaching in this video is a work I've created in the past, which is a personal favorite of mine. I think you'll really enjoy painting it because both the finished product and the steps leading up to it have been very meditative and otherworldly. Part of creating this vibe is suspending all judgment and not worrying about concepts like good, bad, or mistakes. Feel free to go off script. Add your own personal touches and create whatever you want. Whatever your painting looks like is perfect for wherever you are in your development right now. I feel honored that you chose me to be your teacher, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. So we're going to start by building the back first because that is the darkest color in the composition. And when we do it, we're going to use just straight black with no water. As you can see while I'm painting, you have this dry brush effect where like the paint kind of stipples out. That is done completely intentionally. And once we start painting with the water, we'll be able to use that to create some cool effects.
Recent neurological research has confirmed the existence of empathetic mirror neurons. When we experience an emotion or perform an action, specific neurons fire. But when we observe someone else performing this action, or when we imagine it, many of the same neurons will fire again, as if we were performing the action ourselves. These empathy neurons connect us to other people, allowing us to feel what others feel. And since these neurons respond to our imagination, we can experience emotional feedback from them as if it came from someone else. This system is what allows us to self-reflect.
The most important part here is just the fact that the corners look as black as humanly possible, and then you see the stippling outwards towards the center.
Why we want to fit in. We are in a constant duality between how we see ourselves and how others see us. The left cerebral hemisphere is largely responsible for creating a coherent...
Most important in this stage is just to make sure that like at the corners and at the really dark saturated points that you can't see any white.
When they don't fit, they are simply denied. Counterbalancing this is the...
For the next step, now that all the black is laid out, what we want to do is put down like the main structures of the painting, and that way we can make sure that all the black is dry before we start putting down any wet or watery paint.
When the discrepant anomalies become too large, the right hemisphere...
The three main things we want to get down first are the white balls right here.
...are too strong. The right hemisphere may not succeed in overriding our denial. This can create a profound confusion when mirroring others. When the neural connections that physically define our belief system are not strongly developed or active, then our consciousness, the unity of all the separate active circuits at that moment, may consist mainly of activity related to our mirror neurons.
And the reason I'm putting down the white first is because if you put a white directly on top of a black, it's not going to be as luminous because of the dark color underneath. So you always want to keep your colors brighter by putting them directly onto the white surface.
This is not the result of some core self giving commands to different cerebral areas. All the different parts of the brain become active and inactive.
Alright, now we're going to mix an orange. The thing you need to know when mixing oranges is that yellow is always a much weaker color than red. So you need to use a tiny bit of red and a lot of yellow.
The convergence of neural interaction expresses itself as consciousness. The convergence of neural interaction expresses itself as consciousness.
Already here, we're starting to see that effect of having the stippling black. Because when I put the orange straight over top, you can see that stippling underneath, which is kind of creating a cool effect.
The idea of identity. But if we do this with our scientific understandings, we see something completely different.
I believe that's the effect he's talking about right there.
Go far beyond our own neurons. We are equally the results of cerebral hemispheres interacting electrochemically.
You can see how the black comes through the orange.
To other neurons in our environment. Nothing is external. This is not a hypothetical philosophy. It is the basic property of mirror neurons, which allow us to understand ourselves through others. Seeing this neural activity as your own, while excluding the environment, would be a misconception.
Don't worry if the arc is not perfectly straight, because acrylic paint is the most forgiving medium. It dries fast and you can paint over anything. So as a result, you have a huge margin for error.
Every second, we become different persons as we go through different states. When we use our mirror neurons to look at ourselves, we may construct the idea of identity. But if we do this with our scientific understandings, we see something completely different.
And it's always good to have more than one brush present. Reason being is the fact that as you're painting, you're going to be going through a lot of brushes very quick. And this way you can just constantly keep working as opposed to always having to wash in between.
The brain's neural activity resonates most coherently when there is no dissonance between these advanced new cerebral regions and the older, more primitive ones. What we traditionally call selfish tendencies is only a narrow interpretation of what self-serving behavior entails, wherein human characteristics are perceived through the flawed paradigm of identity.
The real trick to drawing straight lines when it comes to painting is to use a good amount of water, and then when you put your brush down, just place the bristles totally flat against the canvas like that, and then drag it. is like a good time where it's good to use water as well, because water helps with the controlling of accuracy when creating forms. Same thing with that technique of like putting your paintbrush like totally flat against the canvas. Also, as you notice, I'm always sketching out the shape first before I fill it in, just because it makes it a lot easier that way. Right here, I know that it's kind of hard to see the white balls because they're like the same color as the canvas. But don't worry about that now, because you can always paint white back over it if you cover parts of it up.
All systems are merely invented fragments. There is no such thing as independence in nature. This isn't just a human experience on this planet, it's a total experience. And we know we can survive without the plants, animals and 4 elements. Success depends on how well we relate to the things around us. There is no such thing as independence in nature. There is no such thing as independence in nature. All systems are merely invented fragments. All systems are merely invented fragments.
Sure.
The game wrong. The game was to find out what I already was, not what I could become. Evolution is a term to define only one organism, and that's the self. The self is the universe. The self is the Alpha and Omega, God.
For this next stage, if you currently had your painting on the easel, what you'll want to do is take it off and turn it flat. Because what we're going to start to do right now is we're going to start to use some very watery paint using a technique called a wash. And if you were painting on easel or something like this, then the paint would run. So what I want you to do right now is dip your brush in a lot of water and then dip it into the yellow paint. Also, for this part right here, it's good if you have two palettes present so you can see what the more watery yellow looks like somewhere that's not going to mess with the other colors.
The self is the universe, the self is the Alpha and Omega, God and infinity. The self is the Alpha and Omega, God and infinity, 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 and Omega, God and infinity.
Right now, as I'm doing this, you're starting to see those areas come out that I was talking about before, where I had like the stippling black. If some of the yellow ends up going over the black, do not worry. Yellow is a pretty transparent color, and you can go back into the black later and intensify that as we go on.
Game wrong. The game was to find out what I already was, not what I could become. Evolution is a term to define only one organism, and that's the self. The self is the universe. The self is the Alpha and Omega, God and infinity. And that's the only thing that evolves, because we are all part of the self. Nothing goes through an evolutionary process alone. All systems are newly invented fragments. There is no such thing as independence in nature. This isn't just a human experience on this planet, it's a total experience, and we know we can survive without the plants, animals and four elements. Success depends on how well we relate to the things around us.
So right now is a moment where you can really start to bring out those white circles that I was drawing in earlier. At this point, we're going to start to see that you're going to need a thinner brush in order to bring out certain things without covering other stuff up. So switch from your large to your medium. I noticed here that I ended up making the yellow almost the same color as the light yellow, which connects the circles to the red part. But that's okay, because I can always go back and bring those out later. to do is red. A lot of people would think to themselves, shouldn't like all the yellow be dry first? And the truth is that it doesn't really matter, because if it blends, it's going to create a cool orange tone. And also on top of that, the place where you would actually start painting the red is where you started painting the yellow, so that area is going to be dry by the time that you get to it. So do the exact same thing that you did with the yellow, where you grab your brush, you use a ton of water, you mix it with the red, as you see here, I did what is called a mess up, where I accidentally put some black into the red. That is another thing that, of course, can be dealt with, since you have a very large margin for error with acrylic paint. So if something like that happens to you while you're painting, don't worry, just keep on going.
Shouldn't you wait for that to dry before painting over it?
That's good. Since it's an abstract painting, things can change as you go along. So it doesn't even really take away from the finished product, and you can actually find some way to work that in if you don't want to cover it up. The next stage is where I'm gonna do what I just did, except with orange. So I'm just gonna mix in some yellow into the red that I've already started painting with. Next step is to go back and use thick paint to intensify some of the areas. right here, I'm covering up that mistake that I made from earlier. So now we're going back into certain areas with thick paint, just to bring them out.
What color? Orange, right?
Again, that stippling technique. This time, since we're blending colors, you can generally just use the exact same brush you're painting with before. Just make sure to wipe it off, like in between. And we're going to be doing thick straight on top of thick. So look what I'm doing here with the red. I'm just putting straight thick paint right into it.
We can measure these changes in the form of a wave.
And then every time that it's too thick, I just wipe and I keep going.
Oh.
Remember, yellow is a weak color, so when you're especially painting over thick paint, you have to use a lot. Right now, we're just using it to blend in.
When a person faces the paradox of wanting purpose while thinking that human existence is meaningless.
With the yellow paint, what I want you to do is just dab where it's yellow, and then actually stretch later. That way you're going to be going straight from the yellow in.
It fails to give answers to existential questions, such as why or what am I?
And because the yellow is really, really, really thick, it's not going to be dry right away. See? Dab, dab, dab. Dab, 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 dab. Dab, dab, dab. Now that I'm done dabbing, the next step is to go in with a dry brush and just drag the yellow straight into the other colors. This. Wipe off the brush, drag the yellow.
The cerebral hemisphere is largely responsible for creating a coherent belief system in order to maintain a sense of continuity towards our lives. New experiences get folded into the pre-existing belief system. When they don't fit, they are simply denied. Can counterbalancing this is the right cerebral hemisphere, which has the opposite tendency.
And then by this point, you can go back into the background and then just use your yellow to start blending straight into what was there. Just like so. And look, you already can see me covering up like what so-called could be mistakes from earlier. Hence why I said earlier that there are no mistakes.
The human brain
Now I'm just doing the same thing with the orange.
100 billion neurons. Different experiences create different neural connections which bring about different emotions. And depending on which neurons get stimulated, certain connections become stronger and more efficient, while others may become weaker. This is what's called neuroplasticity. Someone who trains to be a musician will create stronger neural connections that will link the two hemispheres of the brain in order to be musically creative. Virtually any sort of talent or skill can be created through training. Rationality and emotional resilience work the same way. These are neural connections that can be strengthened.
That looks about good enough here. The good thing about painting really thick is there's sort of an element of randomness to it. Now we want to go in and work on the detail on those balls. Yeah.
Whatever you are doing at any time, you are physically modifying your brain to become better at it. Since this is such a foundational mechanism of the brain, being self-aware can greatly enrich our life experience. Express ourselves and our views are appreciated. These defense chemicals decrease in the brain, and dopamine neurotransmission activates the reward neurons, making us feel empowered and increasing our self-esteem. Our beliefs have a profound impact on our body chemistry. This is why placebos can be so effective. Self-esteem or self-belief is closely linked to the neurotransmitter serotonin. When the lack of it takes on severe proportions, it often leads to depression, self-destructive behavior, or even suicide.
Right now, I'm going to paint in silence for a little bit to see if you can visually pick out some of the techniques that I'm using, which I talked about earlier.
formula combines Einstein's famous E is mc square equation with the quantized nature of energy. Experimental evidence includes the interference pattern of C60 fullerene molecules in a double-slit experiment. The fact that our consciousness itself seems to be made up out of quantized particles has been the subject of many mystical theories. And while the relation between quantum mechanics and consciousness is unlikely to be as magical as recent esoteric movies and literature claim, there is nevertheless a profound implication. The Boy's equations apply to all matter. We can fundamentally establish that C equals HF, where C stands for consciousness, H for the constant of Planck, and F for frequency. C is responsible for what we experience as the now, a quantized or minimum unit of an interaction. The sum of all moments C up till the current moment is what shapes our concept of life. The sum of all moments C up till the current moment is what shapes our concept of life. The sum of all moments C up till the current moment is what shapes our concept of life. The sum of all moments C up till the current moment is what shapes our concept of life.
Long straight lines do not have to be perfect. You can always go back in and change them later and paint over them. It still looks relatively even with the one below. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in the spot that the line goes along mainly to make it look pretty solid. And then I'm going to use background to fill out the area around it. And you generally start by really pressing the brush down and dragging it. But near the end, when you want to taper the line out, put a ton of paint on the brush and then start to float with it to get that point. That's one trick right there you can use. Licking your finger and wiping areas of the canvas. This technique involves using a palette knife or paintbrush to scrape all of the leftover paint off of the palette, and then use it to make a mark on the canvas. What really makes this technique cool is the random patterns the color makes as you lay them down. Just by the patterns within the palette knife-like strokes, we're already starting to see some major differences between the original and this one, just because the shape randomly of the way that the paint is sort of pulled. Well, that's totally alright though. As long as the painting sort of retains the flavor of the original, it can definitely have changes here and there. Right now, for doing things like this, don't worry about getting it all solid from the beginning. Just get the basic sketch of where you want the line to be. Right now I'm just air tracing where I think that the big loop will be. Big white loop that you see in the pic. Seems like in some way the proportions are off from this to the original, just based on the way that I put the composition together. So that's cool though. Like the fact that the proportions are off are just going to make it, in some senses, unique when it's finished. And as I described from earlier, yellow is a very, very, very weak color. So if you saw here, I used only a drop of blue and a ton of yellow to get this green that I have. Always take that into account when mixing anything using yellow. For long straight lines, or just long lines in general, always add water because it will help the paint to flow more.
Why did this happen? Why?
It's Mr. Banana Beat to you, fussy.
All right then.
It's Mr. Banana Beat to you, fussy.
All right.
Fussy.
All right.
It's Mr. Banana Beat to you, fussy.
All right.
It's Mr. Banana Beat to you. you, pussy.
Alright. Why did this happen? Why? Hey, look, the dragon. Hey, look, the dragon.
Another detail I decided to randomly change here is to make this screen slightly transparent in the zigzag formation. Just because I thought it was interesting seeing those patterns that are forming with the yellow. I'm going to leave that in. And maybe just give a hint along the top.
It's a banana beat to you, pussy.
The original parabola starts from here and ends here, but this one I'm going to start from here just so it goes just as deep.
Dragon. Why did this happen? Why? $500? Oh, forget it.
Here I've got some extra paint on my brush. I can use that to float to create a thin line. And here the thin line isn't really complete, but I can come back and make that more solid later. again, I'm using this whole stippling thing to my advantage. But on top of the stippling, I'm also using this other technique where I keep my brush as flat as possible and then use it to create long, thin lines like that. You can enhance those using water to make the lines even thinner and more pronounced, like in the case of that one. Sometimes it's good to just leave pure water in the canvas as opposed to any pigment at all, because it tends to blend with whatever's already on there. In this case, it's only blue, but it still gives a nice effect when that dries. It's going to be pretty transparent. Seems like this blue, and it's very, very, very watery, looks pretty good.
The number you have dialed has been changed. The new number is...
It almost has like a nice sort of greenish effect. So even though in the original one, where I used very dark blue in this area, well, a really solid blue, I'm gonna use a very thin blue instead. Another thing I'm going to change around a little bit here. In the original, the area up near the zigzags, there was a light purple. I'm just going to use a blue and a white instead. Just to see how it turns out.
Dialed has been changed. The new number is... Please note, the new number is...
There's there's also a pink color in here, which I see over and over again, and I might try and substitute that for something else as well to make things more interesting.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
The number you have dialed has been changed.
Normally I would consider that a mess up where it goes kind of like bigger at the end, but that also can be seen as just like an irregular line. In which case, you can really just work with it and then sort of go from there. But it looks kind of cool and it almost adds to the composition a little bit. Now another way of changing the pattern a bit is I could actually continue this line right here using blue. And that also sort of changes where everything started from. One thing to take note of is that colors tend to balance themselves diagonally, even more so than left to right and up and down. So if you have a light blue here, and then you take another light blue and put it here, it tends to do some interesting things to the composition. Check it out. That right there will move your eye through the composition a lot differently. Well, we'll get your eye moving through the composition in a more interesting way.
The number you have dialed has been changed. The new number is...
It's good that you regularly feel your brushes before applying to the paper, just so you know whether or not the stiffness of the brush is appropriate for the line you're trying to make. In this case, I'm trying to make like a very loose, watery line. We're going to be using lots of green. So that means I'll need a much softer brush, especially because the line I'm about to make does not have like a lot of detail. If I'm using a lot of detail, I need something with a bit of a finer point.
The number you have dialed has been changed. The new number is...
So I'm going to use this blue and a lot of water because I think that it's quite beautiful.
The number you have dialed...
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
Remember, lots and lots and lots of yellow. Yellow is a very weak color, so you need to go lots and lots and lots.
Hello?
You can have a little bit of white in there by accident, but that's fine, because white is actually going to make the green even better. Now you want to use a lot of water for this part, because as you can tell in the picture, it's very transparent. This way you still end up seeing some of the tones underneath and getting a fading effect.
One universe, four forces, billions of galaxies.
I'm going to make a thin line, so I'm just going to make my brush as flat as humanly possible. Yes, believe it or not, you can make thin lines with horrible brushes.
How does it all fit together? Is there a single overarching design to the cosmos? And if we find it, will we glimpse the mind of God?
Powerhouse of creation, elemental stabilization, neon, iron, hydrogen, helium, oxygen, and carbon. Nucleosynthesis, we can't
I'm going to use a technique here called using my finger.
we can't exist without this. Nucleosynthesis, giving life to all of
Sometimes your finger can be a really good paintbrush because it just kind of really smears everything out and blends it into the background.
Nucleosynthesis, giving life to all of this. Now that we have fused, I feel no more fear, moving through the sun, feeling so obscure. Now that we have fused, I feel no more fear, moving through the sun, feeling so obscure.
When it comes to the sun, there's something you should know. Outshines
As you can see in the initial photographs, I have that balancing effect. Green, 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 going diagonally.
620 metric tons of hydrogen each second makes it odd. The fact that it supports all life on Earth explains why the Egyptians called it God. Its constant anomalies keep dropping scientists' jaws. And its surface.
But this time what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add some white to the green in order to highlight it, because instead of being on the back of black, this time the green is on the back of blue that's very light, and this will help bring it out some more. See, look at that beautiful tone right there.
The sun's diameter is 864,938 miles, that's whoa. Black Rob a long time ago made a song called Whoa. The sun's radius is 695,500, that's whoa. The core of the sun is 150,000 Celsius, that's whoa. Mathematics is rap, that's whoa. Zeitgeist A.T breaks new meanings to hip hop like whoa.
To describe the sun, I must describe it as a whole, since the mother of existence due to its nurturing role. For example, look at photosynthesis, the conversion of sunlight into energy. 2N2CO2 plus 2NDH2 plus photons to 2 bracket CH2O bracket N plus 2Na. I guess I had to break it down.
I'm going to go back in and really
call me crazy, but the sun's mass volume and density will explain why the sun rocks the earth like a baby. Mass equals
bring out the
times
green
volume
symbol.
equals 1.4 G/cm2 times 1.409 times 10 to the power of 18 equals 1,998 octillion.
Now that we have fused, I feel no more fear, moving through the sun, feeling so obscure. G2VU shines so beautifully, giving us the energy we need. 400 million.
I'm also going to replicate that color in a few of these places. So that green is a little bit of blue, lots of yellow, and then white. And just a little bit of water to help control the thickness.
Nucleosynthesis, we can't exist without this. Such an amazing entity, fused together by
And just little touches here and there can be quite enough. Here I'm just putting straight water on actually to spread around that color a little bit.
relax as you are carried away by us entities. This is the way the universe works. You're just bags of energy. The truth will hit you in the head like a row of bricks because you're just a battery pack in the matrix. So what's with all of this resistance? This is just step one. Your mind frame leaves Earth's plane of existence. So in your next life, please use your head because your body's rebirth now reflects on the book of the dead.
Here I'm not trying to take out the other greens, I'm just trying to enhance it with this green.
You made the transaction, you fired the gun. Don't worry, cross over, it'll be so fun. We don't need you for that long, only until the end of time or so on.
There we go. Now I'm gonna take some red and white. Well, I'm gonna take some red so that we're able to put some purples into this composition. I wanted to put a little bit of a white shade over here, so I'm going to do that by using a lot of water and like a little bit of light. That way I'll get a very transparent tone where I can see a lot of the colors underneath.
What about people that have, gone and come back? But this can't be. This just can't.
And you let the brush sort of like flicker out as you're doing this.
This is now stage 2, it must seem like a dream, a hallucination. So connect the dots like electronic communication or star formation. Connected perfectly with an Egyptian civilization. This is spirit synchronization. Your life is laid before you in fragments and simple simplification. So finish this so you can reincarnate and concentrate on becoming an egg and fertilization.
The anatomy of this part is a little bit wrong, but that's okay because I'll be able to go back and fix certain things later. In fact, I can see sort of the indent of where I painted before, so I can add actually an extra thing in here that wasn't in the original.
They're just laughing as we burn this planet.
You were addicted to drugs ever since you were a teen. You seek spirituality, so you turn to LSD. But now you'll find out what being human really means, because you'll find the meaning of life after death in a field of dreams. You messed up. You should have had that realization. Your body is a stem, your soul is a crop. So now we're putting that crop through cultivation, horticulturalization, because you're just a seed being used for procreation. I know you're clinging to your family and your wife, but unfortunately every action is a reaction, because the universe is one big tree of life.
Can you feel them calling? Can you hear them falling? Did you know they're watching you turn into nothing now? You feel so helpless, titans. Take this last breath of this universal mess of their construction. You know they're just laughing as we burn this planet. You know they're just laughing. You know they're just laughing.
Understand we're coming at you with crazy action. What an abstraction, because this part of the transaction will stick to you like a physiological reaction or electromagnetic interaction. You need like space, your body's hypersensitive, you blasted from the laws of attraction. Clash with the titan, hit the masses, hit the skies.
Now, since there's a lot of red here, and I want to differentiate the background, I'm going to use a bit of a different color in this one than the original. I'm I'm going to take the purple that I just made, and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of white. As you can see, when you mix purple with white, like an ugly purple with the white, it starts to look a lot nicer.
Have you heard about Alberta's oil sands lost to the Americans? Foreign companies destroying our own land. 1 million barrels a day. Is this truly the Canadian way? For Chippewan's pay, locked like porcelain clay. Can you please just stop before we all dwindle away? Who's going to pay for these crimes? People stop existing in the sublime. Government has to pay for these atrocities that are so great.
We are the #1 supplier of oil to the United States. We beat out Saudi Arabia, using a force the size of Florida to stretch out like a labia, with more operations to keep people to Babylon and the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia. So the fall of this will be great because it will be breaking you. This will only last the United States 10 years. X amount of cars riding without fear. But to the destruction of the world, you can say that the United States have shifted their gears.
Even more white
Wildlife by putting the pedal to the metal. Understand that extract oil from the outback
saturate it as much as humanly possible.
Than the normal oil. How can we be proud to be
And
Canadian doing this
use a
on our
thinner
own
brush.
soil?
Are you enjoying your black gold rush? How many lives must be lost? 300 barrels of oil from 400 tons of sand. I can't believe you sold out your own land.
Let me ask you something. How does a town have no word for cancer end up with the highest rate of cancer in the world? Why would government privatize studies of the environment? Why would Health Canada stop a doctor from helping these people and take away his license? I guess
Now, again, I'm putting the pink in a slightly different spot as last time.
It's kind of good it ain't coming from hostile sources.
But it is
We're destroying
going to
Canada's
work.
natural resources. And the government paying people not to talk about things is called extortion. That's how bullies work. They push people around who they think are smaller so they can feel more important. Mel Knight, the Minister of Alberta, you're telling stories that ain't true. To the corporations, you're a slave. So
And
it's
then to
only
make it
right
more
that
interesting, I'm
you
going to do one more thing.
Like DMX would
with
say,
purple.
get at me, dog, so I can put your body where it should rightfully rest in Alberta's oil smog. To extract oil from these sands requires far too much heat. The evidence is too hard to ignore because it's cemented in like concrete. 60 kilometers of toxic lakes that leak. Tumors on fish that no one can ever eat. Cancers and deformities on people so sweet. Why is Health Canada part of the elite? I thought they're supposed to help us, even when the city's burning and there's anarchy. So when are you gonna open up your eyes? I guess life is but a dream. Merrily, 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 life is just a dream.
Now we're going to return to a slightly nicer brush. And then now, my favorite part. I'm going to go in and start using some of these colors. And you want to, of course, balance from. Unfortunately, the camera cut out as I was doing my last stroke on the canvas. This, right here, is the very last stroke that I made. This video is going to be the first of many. I will keep some short, some long, some will be simple, and others will be more complex. And I will even be taking on realistic subject matter like figure and portraiture. I'm also doing videotaped commissions, so if you would like me to paint something and film my entire creative process from beginning to end, please contact me and we'll see what we can work out. Twist's company, Think Free Productions, also has some new musical projects which are yet to be released, so make sure to keep an eye on his YouTube page as well. As of now, he has work in several different styles, which are all unique and interesting in their own right. I thank you for spending your time with me today, and hopefully we shall see each other again soon.